Well, everyone, welcome to a very special edition of Grace at Night. Today, we have Senior Pastor James Edward Leggett here at the table. And I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty awesome conversation, but we're going to go places that you would never expect. So here we go. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Benjamin. What's your middle name?
Yu, Y-E-U. It's weird.
Benjamin Yu.
Benjamin Yu.
That's good.
That's right.
And happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Tomorrow's your birthday. I don't know when this will air,
birthday.
but tomorrow's your birthday. How old will you be tomorrow?
I'm going to be 30. I'm going to be the age you need to be to run for president.
35.
35. That's right. Isn't that wild?
Well, I'm going to vote for you. I'm going to
you.
write you
man.
in.
I would really appreciate that. I have this whole plan outlined. I really feel like the world would be better if everyone just rode bicycles more. And that would be my entire platform. I'm like, you know what? Healthcare issues, traffic issues, financial issues, just ride a bicycle. And it solves a lot of those things, right?
I'm voting for Ben.
What were you doing when you were 35 years old?
35. I was here. We were 4 years into Grace Fellowship. So I would have been 2000, year 2000.
Oh, yeah.
I was on December 31st, 1999, I was wondering if Y2K was going to happen. That was all the buzz then. Was everything going to shut down when the computers turned to 2000?
Right.
Let's see. I had 3 kids at that time. So John David would have been 1, Smith would have been 8, and Grace would have been 6.
Wow.
And so I was just doing life, preaching away, and loving life. Yeah, 35 is a good age.
It is a good age. So in my mind, being a preacher, if I had to boil it down, it's like writing a research paper every week and then having to present it. Why would you do that to yourself?
Well, first of all, I'm a nerd. So I actually enjoy research papers.
Awesome.
I think calling my life to preach God's word is the right and correct answer on that. I love it. It is a lot of pressure. You and I were talking before we came on about Thursdays, and Thursday is, I pretend that I have to preach Thursday at noon, and so I put all this pressure on myself to be ready at Thursday at noon. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of pressure. Turning in a term paper once a week is a lot of pressure.
Yes.
But it's very, very fulfilling.
I have to say that you are so consistent between first and second services. As someone who's done kind of the direction behind the scene, I've watched you preach, and it's really amazing. Like, how many times do you maybe run through the sermon every week?
Right, twice. So I Monday through Thursday, I prep it. Thursday at 11 a.m., I practice it. Sunday morning at 7 a.m., I practice it.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's my style. Some of my buddies are way more ad lib and probably way more entertaining than I am. So anyway.
Sure. So speaking of turning 35, like, how do you see, what do you see differently in the body at Grace Fellowship, perhaps when you were 35 versus now, where outside of the size or whatever, but what's different about the people that you pastor?
Well, so size is a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was 35, year 2000, we were probably at 800. Mm-hmm. And today, typical Sunday, we'll have 3,000. And there's just a difference in that. There's a different dynamic in that. And if I'm honest, I like 800 better because you can interact with almost every single person. Mm-hmm. So I actually think the ideal size is 800, which is why I believe in campuses. And we don't have to go down this tangent, but North Katy campus is an attempt to do that, and then a third campus eventually. But other differences, when I was 35, Grace Fellowship was a lot less diverse, and Katy, Texas was a lot less diverse. Mm-hmm. And I like age 58 better. The Grace Fellowship is so beautifully diverse today, and it just warms my heart every Sunday as I'm just walk around and greet people and just seeing we look more like heaven, and I like that. So,
I love so many people come in wearing clothing from like their culture. I think that's the coolest thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And especially our Nigerian friends.
Yes, exactly.
Just so beautiful. And, once every 6 to 8 years, depending on leap year, we have Christmas falls on a Sunday morning. And our Nigerian family shows up in mass to that service. And usually dressed in beautiful African garb. And I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's really awesome. So, so we were speaking about, campuses and going from 800 to 3,000. I remember maybe reading somewhere that the average human has like the capacity for 150 relationships. That's the number, So as someone who clearly knows thousands of people, how do you manage that? Like, how do you balance that? Like, for me personally, I could probably count 30, 40 people who I am deeply maybe invested in.
Right.
And I just don't know if I have the capacity to go beyond that. How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Benjamin. I think all of us have relationships in concentric circles. And so, my family is that inner circle. And so super, super deep relationship there. And then the next circle would be my closest friends. And so there's probably 7 to 10 in that circle. And then the next circle would be friends. And there's probably 70 to 80 to 90 in that circle. And then church family and then community. And so, I think like any other person, you've got these concentric circles, and I love every single one of my concentric circles. But there's only so much depth and interaction you can have the farther out in the concentric circle, which is why it's super important to me that everybody has a concentric circle. One of the things we say around here is circles are better than rows.
Right.
And so it's just super important that everybody have that family circle, whatever that looks like for them, and then that next circle of friends, the next circle of friends. I think that's how any church becomes healthy. And then as a pastor, I rest assured as people in my outer concentric circle, I know that they have inner concentric circles. And that takes the pressure off of me to have them be in circle number 2, or feel like I have to have a circle number 2 relationship with everybody. I don't. My job is to make sure that everybody has a circle number 1, 2, and 3.
That's brilliant.
But one of my favorite things to do is just walk around before the services and after the services on Sunday morning, just greet people. And it's sincere. I love the people at Grace Fellowship. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how my little brain and relational denominator works. So.
A relational denominator. That's a band name right there. My goodness. Wow. Yeah, that's really deep. That your job, I guess, is to make sure other people have their own circles.
Right.
And that's a really like just easy way to summarize everything that a pastor does, maybe like building these relationships, building people's relationship with God, building with their community, with each other, and with their families. Wow. And it's interesting now to think about it, because it's like perhaps the closer of a thing, or if you're experiencing something and the closer of a circle it's affecting, kind of the bigger of a heart or God issue it might be. Right. I think about, a lot of the testimony videos that I've filmed that usually the more interesting ones, or the more the ones that really show you the amazingness of like God's love, are the ones where like people, something's happened to family, or something's happened within your close circle of friends. And I feel like maybe a lot of through those relationships is where God does a lot of the talking and pointing and opening doors for you to say go, or closing doors for you to say no. And so, yeah, those relationships are important.
Absolutely. And just thinking about your question, it's interesting. So everything I just said about concentric circles is true. However, I get invited into people's innermost circle when I officiate a wedding, or when I do a funeral, or when I walk through the death of a loved one with somebody, or somebody's having a crisis in their marriage and I'm walking through with that. All of a sudden, people that were in my sixth concentric circle, they invite me into their inner circle, and I go fully into that circle with them as we walk through a valley together, or a celebration, like a wedding together. And so that's an amazing privilege. Like, I don't deserve to be in their inner circle, but I get invited in for a window, and then it's ongoing. But it's or another way I used to describe it is I get a front row seat. But I like the concentric circle illustration better. But like officiating a wedding, like the couple is standing inches from me, and I've got the best seat in the house. To this couple that's staring into each other's eyes and taking these lifelong vows, it's really, really fun, and it's a great, great honor.
Yeah.
And funny things happen. So
no.
One of my favorite wedding stories, I married Sam and Rebecca. And Sam is this tender guy. And so I'm off with the groomsmen and Sam before the wedding. We're praying over him. He's getting all emotional. And then the music starts. We come in the side, and we're all lined up, and we start the ceremony. Well, it comes time to exchange vows. We're in this old German Lutheran church out near Schulenburg. Have you heard me tell this story?
I have not, no.
Okay. And it's a beautiful church, big old stained glass windows, but it's a small church, but big old stained glass windows. It's a evening, the sun's setting. So Sam and Rebecca are facing one another, and they start exchanging vows. Well, Sam starts getting really emotional, and when you get really emotional, your eyes water and your nose begins to drip. And so Sam had this clear snot dangling out of his nose as he's exchanging vows. And it's literally this glistening, thick, white coming out of his nose, dangling there. And then the stained glass window with the sun going down the sun shoots through his dangling snot and goes out like a prism into the congregation. And it was the best sight. And I got a front row seat. And then in one of the most romantic gestures I've ever seen in my life, Rebecca reaches over, grabs the snot from his nose, throws it on the ground, and grabs his hands again. And it was an epic moment. Epic.
Is awesome.
So who gets a front row seat to that? I do. It was very, very fun.
Wow. What's the furthest you've had to travel to do someone's wedding?
That's a fun question. California.
Okay.
California. Cool. But if any of you want to get married in Hawaii, I'm willing to go there, Lisa and I together, if you bring Lisa with us. So.
Oh, that's awesome. How do you feel when someone, because this has definitely happened in my life, but when someone just over time moves from circle number 1 or 2 outwards to, 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes 6. This definitely happens a lot with like high school friends, maybe.
Right.
But what's your gut reaction to that? Yeah,
that's hard. It's part of life. But that's hard. And there's different ways that can happen. Losing touch with friends, or moving away. but then also conflict. And even though you follow biblical conflict resolution, sometimes those relationships stop being circle number 2 and move to circle number 5 or 6. And that's painful. That's really, really painful. So when Lisa and I moved here in 1996 and started Grace Fellowship, one of the questions we get all the time at Exploring Grace 101, which is now called Connecting at Grace, is, Jim, how long are you going to be here? Because, it seems like pastors move every 5 years. And my answer was always, we're going to follow the Lord's lead 1 year at a time. But if the Lord would allow it, we'd love to stay here a really, really long time. So 27 years later, Ben, we're still here. And my beef is with the people that asked that question who then moved away. And it's like, we've been here 27 years. And so now I want to start interviewing people who come to Connecting at Grace and like, how long are you going to stay here? Because it's hard to just pour your life into people and then they move, but it's part of life.
Yeah.
It's just part of life. How about you on that question? I'd love to hear you on that question.
Oh, man. Yeah. I am not great at making friends.
Okay.
I'm good with people. I
You're
can
really good at
I think
people.
I can but I would say I kind of stopped intentionally making friends maybe after high school.
Okay.
Because college was all about I was deep in just studying and didn't party or anything. I really didn't socialize. And I felt like that's really what I wanted. I felt great about that. And so I held on really tightly, or I hold on really tightly to friends from Katy, Texas, essentially. But yeah, people move and people, I think life stages is a big thing. Like once I became a parent, the things that I did in my day-to-day is just very different from someone who doesn't have kids.
Right.
But I think it might work in my favor because since I've perhaps intentionally kept my circle small, it is much easier for me to, I guess, maintain those relationships.
Sure.
But there have been a few, some just through death, where those relationships aren't there anymore, and it is something that weighs kind of heavily on me. It is something where I do feel bitterness, jealousy, maybe if I'm investing into someone and they're not investing the same back in me. But I understand, right? Like
right.
I might be moving out of their number one or number two, but I'm still holding on. So I don't know if that's a healthy thing or not, but it is just where I'm at life-wise.
Ben, you're really good with people. I spy on you all the time. You don't know it. And back when you had Olin's job, in media, you had this open invitation every Saturday for people to join you at Coca-Coda's from the media team. And that was awesome. And they showed up and y'all just had relational time together.
Yeah.
Kudos.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Speaking of relational time, I'm starting a Zoom meeting, a weekly Zoom gathering, 12 p.m. on Thursdays. So right after you practice your sermon.
Right.
I'm just going to start that and just see what happens. I've had a few people, actually some of them who are teachers like in KISD, high school teachers,
right.
who have a lunch break at 12 and I just really want to be in but I can't Monday through Friday because I'm stuck at school. So I was like, okay, maybe we can have just a lunch hangout, but virtually by Zoom. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that experiment and see where that goes.
That's good. I like that.
Thanks.
It's Coca-Coda's online.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man, I love Coca-Coda. I love the guy who runs it. His name's Charlie. he's a very hard worker. He does seem stressed out all the time. But there's an item on their menu. It's a secret item. It's called Charlie's tea, and it's just a combination of lemon, ginger, and honey that he like ferments and stuff, and then he adds hot water to it. So if you're ever feeling sick or you have just stuff in your throat or something, it's the best.
Ferments? Does that mean there's an alcohol component to it?
No. I think what he does is like he makes a mixture. It's like I don't know. There's like a natural fermentation process between the sugar and the honey, and then the lemon and the ginger.
Okay.
That, I mean, you might. I think eventually, if you let it go long enough, probably alcohol will be formed. But it's just like it makes it a little bit more. There's like healthier bacteria introduced and all sorts of things. Wow. One story that I want you to tell, for those of you who might not know. So you have a habit of parking in very far away parking spots. So I kind of want to know that story again. I know the story. But.
Yeah. So my first ministry assignment was Waco, Texas. I was associate pastor at church there in Waco, and the senior pastor was a guy named Dick Freeman. Dick was awesome. He totally different personality than mine. Super strong leader. He literally carried a bullwhip in his trunk, and he was always packing. And that's just strong leader. And so on one of my first days on the job, we were coming up upon my first Sunday there, and he pulled me aside. He said, "Jim, leaders always park the farthest away. No one should have to walk farther than the leader." And so he said, "I, Dick Freeman, are going to park the farthest away, and I want you to park the second farthest away." And so that church in Waco had this parking lot, catty corner, way across the street. And so we would both park there on Sunday morning. He was the farthest spot, I was the second farthest spot. And I just never forgot that. It rang true to Scripture, that leadership is about serving, and it's not about having your own parking spot closest to the church with your name on it, but rather the opposite of that. And so, so I want to be like Dick Freeman. That's who I think was trying to be like Jesus. And who knew? Step counters weren't back in those days, but I get more steps.
Sure.
So now, what's made it a little bit harder is, so I do that on Sunday morning for sure, and I try to do it every day at staff meeting or work week. But now we've got this covered parking in the back. I'm totally digging that, and so I try to park in the farthest corner of that.
The covered parking lot.
That's funny. Thanks for bringing that up.
It's funny because a couple of us, myself included, I've noticed like over the course of the past year, we've all started like joining you. But my reasoning for it, I've talked to Stephen about this, is because for creatives, maybe we're a little bit scatterbrained, and it helps to have tiny habits, right?
Right.
Especially tiny habits that you don't really need to put any effort towards to get your day going. And so not only is it good exercise, but and most of the time people don't park in those spots. So I have this spot that's like number 3 across and like in the front, where I park there every day because I feel like if I do, it's just something consistent that I do every day that gets my morning going.
Yeah, that's good.
And if I don't park in that spot, I'm like, oh no, today is gone. Right?
That's funny. So Barry Morton on our team, he started messing with me. I don't know if he was doing it on purpose or not, but he started biking to work. So part of your presidential plan.
Yes.
He started biking to work, and then changing clothes, and then biking home. And so he wanted to keep his car up here in case it rained. He had a backup plan. And so he purposely parked his car kind of in a horrible spot just because he was going to be leaving it here overnight and that kind of stuff. Well, it was farther away than my farthest spot. And so then I had to changed my car location to be farther than Barry's spot. So thanks, Barry.
That's awesome. Oh, I love Barry. Barry has such a playful spirit about him. I just absolutely love it. And he is the guy. We one of our 10 things we say around here is I see in you. He's the guy who comes up to me every Sunday and tells me a different I see in you. And it's
About
great.
you.
About me,
That's
yeah.
so awesome.
It doesn't have to be super deep or anything, but he's always just like amazingly encouraging. And man, I wish I had that, like, I don't know, skill maybe to identify what's great about someone and speak it back to them. That's a gift right there. It's really awesome.
I see you do that. I see that in you.
Oh, thanks. I'd love to dive into the weeds here. And I think everybody watching this is going to want to know about your thoughts on Make Room for Grace. Okay. And what, if you could give a 90-second summary of your not your heart, but your perhaps reasoning for it, because we know where your heart's at. I know that this is something that is not something that Jim necessarily wants, but it's definitely something that Jim's got to figure out. So, so where do you stand? What's your, how do you feel about it?
Sure. That's a complicated question and an easy one, too. I mean, my personality type does not like to talk about money or ask people for money or anything like that. And so who would sign up for that in my position? Like, who would sign up to say, let's ask everybody to give money so we can build a building? Like, who? And so it's definitely not driven by that. Because I'd much rather be playing pickleball.
Sure.
But it comes out of not just me, but the leadership of Grace Fellowship praying and saying, Lord, what do you have next for us? What do you want us to do? What's your next assignment for us? And so going all the way back to 2018, we began to feel like God was saying, it's time to make room for more people, make room for grace, make room for more people to be reached. And it's time to do that, especially in the area of discipleship spaces, places. And so, I mean, that's the heart behind it, is let's make room for more people by helping North Campus be able to reach more people. So, backing up on that part of it, we birthed North Campus 8 years ago, started in a school, and 3 years in, moved into a portion of a warehouse that we were renting a portion of that. They've outgrown that, and it's just time for North Campus to have their own home, a permanent home. And history shows that when you do that, you reach more people. You just do. I mean, so this campus, when we built our first building, we doubled. It's a physical presence. So let me go down a rabbit trail if I can.
Sure.
I have a pastor friend in California, Modesto, California. Modesto right next to Hemet, California. And he started a church there, and it grew to a certain size, and then it just stopped growing. And he knew God wanted them to reach more people for Christ. And so he was in his prayer closet, like, Lord, I know you want us to reach more people for Christ. What's hindering us from doing that? And he didn't hear an audible voice, but he heard God say, go buy a cemetery plot. Like, what? Go buy a cemetery plot? Go buy a cemetery plot. That was it. And so he obeyed, but he just couldn't figure it out. Mm. And then he was just doing his Bible reading plan, and he just began to notice all the scriptures about land and commitment to land. And all of a sudden, this light bulb went off on his head. When you commit by buying a cemetery plot in a city, you commit to that city, you've committed to the land, and there's something that happens in the spiritual realm, let alone in other people's minds. Oh, he's here to stay. He's not fly-by-night pastor coming in and out. And I think you see that theme through Scripture as well, like Abraham buying the plot to bury Sarah in, and you could trace land through Scripture. But there's something about the difference between renting a school cafeteria, renting a corner of a warehouse, and actually buying land and committing to the land. I think there's a spiritual principle there, and I think it sends a message to the community, like, we are a part of you, and we're here to stay. This is not a tent meeting, so I think it's time for North Katy campus to buy a plot of land, and so I think we'll reach more people for Christ there, and then discipleship building on this campus, and then seed money for a third campus. It's time to make room for more people. There's you asked a question. I'll just keep talking as if you don't stop me. There's an obscure story in Kings and Chronicles about 4 lepers. This story gets me every time. So there's a famine in the land. Well, the bad guys have besieged Jerusalem, and nobody can get out of Jerusalem. And the bad guys are just waiting it out as everybody in Jerusalem starves to death. That was warfare back in those days. And so everybody in Jerusalem is starving to death. And these 4 lepers are like, we're going to die anyway. Let's leave Jerusalem, sneak out of Jerusalem, and go see if we can find some food outside of Jerusalem. Well, and the story's longer. It involves the prophet saying a prophecy. But that night, the angel of the Lord comes and basically scares away all the bad guys. And they leave all their tents and all their food and all their tents. And so next morning, these 4 lepers are like, we're going to die anyway, let's leave. They leave, they go out, and they find all these abandoned tents with all this food in it, and then silver and gold. And so they're eating, turkey drum leg sticks, and they're just gorging on all this food, and they're taking silver and gold and burying it where nobody else will find it. Eventually, they look up at each other and they're like, this isn't right. Everybody inside Jerusalem walls is starving right now. And we're out here gorging on all this food, and there's more food than we can ever eat. We got to go share this good news with the people inside the walls of Jerusalem. And so they go and they share, and then people leave Jerusalem and have all this food. And every time I read that story, and just going through my Bible reading plan, I'm like, oh, yeah. Like, I've got the gospel. I've got the good news of Christ. And I can't just keep that to myself. Like, there's people starving spiritually. And so that's the heart behind Make Room for Grace, is we've got all this spiritual food. We've got the gospel. And there's more than 300,000 people in Katy, 260,000 of which don't have that. We got to share it with more people. So that's the heart behind Make Room for Grace.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't realize the number was that. Right. It's interesting when you talk about commitment. I feel like it's somewhat countercultural in the sense that I feel like everyone's not about commitment. I guess the average age of getting married just slowly has been older and older, and the idea of like traveling as a lifestyle is a really big thing with Instagram and social media, and like just taking all these perfect pictures and just constantly being away from the same place. It's like, if you have all those options available to you, why would you commit to living in a place like Katy, Texas, right? So yeah, I think it does speak to what does God really want? What doors has He opened? And are you going to follow through on that? Because it just doesn't seem like the easiest or the most typical thing to do,
Right.
to be able to commit to somewhere, and say, hey, I kind of relate it to buying a house maybe as opposed to renting an apartment.
Right.
When you rent an apartment, you could effectively terminate your lease and be out within the day. But if you've got a house, it's a much longer process. And in that sense, you have to think about it a lot more, and
Right.
yeah, it does say something.
Yeah, that's good, Ben. And you and I can't tell other people what to do in terms of staying in one city for a long time. And I'm not sure. I'm not even sure I would, get on air and make that kind of statement of, oh, you can only live in one city your whole life. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But even people who are moving around need a church community that's stable and has committed to be in that community. And so, yeah, I think commitment to the land is huge. And then, what you brought up, there's some generational stuff in that. And I'm not going to seek to sway a whole new generation. We just did the memorial service for Mike Kincaid. Mike. And, just as I was rehearsing his life, he worked for McDonald's for 56 years. Like he worked for the same
Wow. That's
company
that. I knew he worked for McDonald's,
for
but
56 years. He started on the French fry machine and eventually, worked as a manager and then worked as a regional manager. He owned a franchise for a while, but 56 years to the same company. And I'm not getting on air and telling anybody they need to work for the same company for 56 years. But there's something about that I don't know. I like it. Assuming it's a good company and it's helping people, and, feeding people is, yeah. And then, in my role as a pastor, I think I can do more good. So back to Exploring Grace 101, people ask me, how long are you stay, Jim? And I give the correct answer, which is I need to follow the Lord 1 year at a time. But if the Lord allowed, I want to stay a really, really long time. It takes 5 years for people to begin to trust a pastor. And so why would a pastor move every 5 years? You just crossed the threshold of people trusting you. And so I'd rather stay for 27 plus years and build trust and work through all 66 books of the Bible, which takes a long time.
Sure.
Anyway.
What's it feel like to have been in a role for 27 years? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it feels good. On the positive side, it feels stable. It feels, I really believe in what I'm doing, what I've committed my life to, and that's fulfilling. It feels good to know people over a period of time. And so, some of the teenagers in our very first youth group are now parents with children here at Grace Fellowship. You being one.
Right.
Wow. And that's just really, really fulfilling.
Yeah.
And when Gus is in high school,
Man.
and if Lord willing, I'm still alive and I get to do the prayer altar thing with Gus and you and Maria leave him at the altar, just getting to do that with you and get to do it with Gus, that's pretty darn fulfilling.
Yeah.
Really different. Now, the flip side of it is I need to guard against getting into a rut, and I need to guard against being on autopilot, and so I just frequently have to remind myself, all right, Lord, I don't want to be in a rut. What's the what's the next thing you want to do? And so actually make room for grace is one of the things he said.
I love that the little. So what are some like practical practices that you have for not going into autopilot? Because I immediately what goes in my mind is like you do 2 sermons every Sunday or the same sermon twice. And so it's like a lot of people joke about how like first service is the practice run. Second, right? Not in your case, obviously, but like what keeps it fresh for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. I think for me, it starts with time with the Lord every morning, and doing that in a fresh way, and then listening and obeying. And God is the opposite of boring. And so if you're listening to and following God, Aslan will keep it fresh, and sometimes beyond the risk levels that I want to take, and yet I want to follow Jesus. And so I think it starts there. Accountability. So my accountability friend and partner, Tim Barker, and I've invited him to speak into my life, including if I'm getting in a rut. And then other people on the team, yourself included, who are following the Lord, and bringing young guns onto the team, because there's just something about 35-year-olds and 31-year-olds and 27-year-olds that tend to keep it fresh. And so I saw a sign. I probably could pull it up on my phone because I took a picture of it. I saw it on the internet, but it's a sign in Alaska that says, what's the exact wording? Choose your rut carefully. So it's a sign for cars. Choose your rut carefully because you will be in it for the next 25 miles. So in Alaska, there's a certain season where the roads get muddy, and then cars drive through it, and then it freezes. And so if your tires get in those grooves, you have to stay in those grooves for the next 25 miles. And it was just a really interesting sign. So I don't even know why I brought that up.
That's cool. Have you ever been to Alaska?
I've not. It's on my bucket list.
Awesome.
So my son John David, Rabbit Trail.
Yeah.
So John David has always had an adult sense of humor since he was Gus's age. So when he was Gus's age, Gus is 5. Yeah,
6.
He's 6.
Yeah, just turned 6.
John David had an adult sense of humor. And my wife, Lisa, was cold all the time. She's just always cold. Now, it's not since she hit menopause, TMI, but she was always cold. And so John David hooked into that as a 5 and 6-year-old. He's like, Mom, you know where I'm going to live when I grow up? Where's that, John David? Alaska. She's like, no, not Alaska. It's too cold there. And so he loved to tease her like that. Well, somehow that got him infatuated with Alaska. And so he just started studying Alaska. At one time we were in Galveston at the Army-Navy surplus store. I don't know if you ever seen that place.
Yeah.
He found an Alaskan flag. He bought it with his own money. He hung it in his room. He just became infatuated with Alaska. Then when he was about 11, he said, I want to go to Alaska. Right? That's a great dream. Well, he could tell we weren't taking him there. And so he starts talking to his grandmother, Lisa's mom, about Alaska. And she says, I've been to all 50 states, and Alaska's the only one I haven't been to. He said, I might like to go to Alaska. He says, Grandma, let's go. So he's a wheeler and dealer. He starts talking his grandma into taking him to Alaska. And so he comes to us, and he says, if I can talk Grandma into going to Alaska, can I go with her? And so we're like, if you save up your money and pay your own way, yes. We thought he'd never do it. He did it. He saved like $2,000, and he and his grandma went on an Alaskan cruise, and he paid for his own way on it. So that's my Alaska story. But Lisa and I want to go to Alaska. It's on our bucket list.
That's amazing.
Have you been?
I have not. No. Yeah. My father worked for BP, and so he was there all the time. And actually, my childhood teddy bear is from Alaska, so that's my only connection. But yeah, I don't know. I have
Do you still have that teddy bear?
I do still have that teddy bear.
I double dog dare you to bring it on to this podcast at some point.
Oh yeah, he would be the mascot. Just have him
awesome.
sitting right here. Man, that's so cool. It's amazing what kids are capable of. Like, one of my former teachers in elementary school. We were talking, we were having lunch, and she's telling me about how this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago before I was a parent. She was telling me about how her grandchild, who was 1 or 2 at the time, was able to operate an iPad. And I was like, depending on what they're actually doing on the iPad, I've always had that thought in the back of my mind as I've seen my kids grow up, and just every time I see them do something I'm like, that just seems like something you shouldn't be able to do until you're older, or something you shouldn't be able to say, or a concept you shouldn't be able to realize until you're older.
Right.
But it's astounding. And then, you think about 500 years ago when kids were going to college at age 13 or 14. I'm like, that's just a really interesting thing to ponder. Athletes, and the capability of someone who's younger than you, and as I've grown older, I'm at the age where I can see, someone who's a decade younger than me and getting into the NFL. It's like, whoa, they've accomplished so much, and it's just an amazing. I don't know. I find it just a really cool place to be able to see that from where I'm at.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I know. That's. Wow.
Now that you're 35 tomorrow.
Now that I'm 35 tomorrow, what do you typically do on your birthday?
So my birthday's July 20th. And so that's when we typically take vacation. And our favorite place to vacation is the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. So typically on my birthday, I'm on a hike.
That's awesome.
And my hike of choice would always be Sky Pond outside of Estes Park. It's this amazing hike. It's a hard hike. It's about a 5-hour hike.
Wow.
And you have to climb up a waterfall.
What? Okay.
To get there. And it's doable. And then you get up there, and it's called Sky Pond because there's this pond up there, and it's almost like it's floating in the sky. It's so high up, and it's just surrounded by mountains. And so in my will, I've got my will, and then I've got my wishes in the same folder that my will is in. And in there is like the songs that I want to sung at my funeral, and I want Tim Barker to officiate, please. But in there is I want to be cremated, and I want my kids to take my ashes up to Sky Pond.
Wow.
And so when I wrote that, Lisa's like, Jim, you shouldn't make them do that. It's a hard hike, and who knows how old they'll be, and then maybe they don't want to do that. And I'm like, they don't have to do it. I'm just writing out my wishes in here, and my grandkids will do it. Peter will do it. And so anyway.
Wow. How old were you when you wrote your will?
Yeah, I wrote a will when our first kid was born, when Smith was born. Just wanted to have my ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And then I've rewritten it 6 times since then.
It's a good reminder.
Do you have a will?
I do not.
All right, Benjamin.
Yep. You got it. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely... I think about that a lot because my dad passed away when I was 7. It's just really, I don't know, it's just really complicated, I guess. And one of my favorite things ever is whenever we have a Nigerian memorial service here at Grace Fellowship, because it's a celebration that whoever has passed is now with Jesus.
Right.
And so because I experienced close death at such a young age, the whole concept has just been a very dark thing for me. But like, I don't know, I want it to be a very Nigerian thing, where it is a celebration more
Absolutely.
so. But yeah, I definitely lots of legal things to figure out too with.
And writing a will isn't. I don't know how we're getting on this on the podcast, but
Fine.
it's it can be really easy. I mean, the websites make it easy. Make sure you're not in a sham website, but you don't have to go out and get a lawyer to do it. I mean, there's just some standard forms. You just need to make sure that if you died, everything goes to your wife, and if she dies, that your kids are taken care of. Versus if you don't have a will, it makes the whole process a lot harder. So I triple dog dare you, before you put the bear back here, just a rough will.
Got
just
it.
a rough will.
Can do.
And to think through, I mean, this is a little bit morbid, but if your entire family died, where do you want your money to go? And so for Lisa and I, we wanted to go to our kids and our grandkids, but then we put certain Christian causes, including Grace Fellowship, in our will, and including the Bible Seminary. That if everybody in my family died all at once, we've got these Christian causes that we want things to go to. So anyway, it's worth thinking through.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. That's some grown-up stuff right there.
My daughter Grace is 29, and her frequent phrase to us is, "Mom, Dad, I don't like adulting." Whether it's paying bills or whatever. And yeah.
I had one last thing I wanted to ask you. So, you preached on anxiety a few weeks or months ago. So that's something that I know a lot of people experience it. My wife's currently going through some, I guess, more anxiety than usual, just
Right.
panic attacks and things. And I'm not necessarily looking for any, I don't know, theological excavating about this, but if you had to give someone who's experiencing a lot of anxiety one practical step, what's the first step? And I ask this because this week alone, I've had so many people come up to me and just telling me about some anxiety related thing that they're going through. Because I manage I moderate the online chat, and whenever someone submits a prayer request, they can kind of, and I feel like the mere medium of it being online and in a chat room, people are more open. And so between that and between the people who have come up to me, between what Maria's going through right now, I don't know, if you had to give one step, what's the first step?
Yeah. So I have something I want to say, and it's just like that. But I want to distinguish between chronic mental illness anxiety and situational anxiety, because I think it's important. And so I want to speak to situational anxiety. So a simple prayer: Lord, I give everything and everyone to you. And I pray that prayer 11 times a day. Something happens that wants to spike anxiety inside of me. And Lord, I give that to you. Matter of fact, Lord, I give everyone and everything to you. It's just a prayer of surrender and a prayer of giving it to God. Years ago, back when the worship center was in what's now the student building, we did a sermon on 1 Peter 5, and there's the phrase in there, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And as I dug deep into that phrase and the original words of that phrase, the picture that came up was that of a heavy backpack. And so in that message, I had a backpack up on stage, and I had all these bricks. So I started talking about what the bricks are that bring us anxiety and worry. And I started putting them in, I named them one at a time. I put them in the backpack, and then I put them on my shoulders. And it was heavy. I had like 12 bricks in there. It was heavy. It was uncomfortable. It was painful. And I said, I just want to do right now what the scripture says. And so I went down to the prayer altar. I kneeled. I got this heavy backpack on. And I say, God, I give everything and everyone to you. I cast my anxieties on you. And then I had asked Rob Schweitzer, who's 6'6", 250-pound, all muscle, retired police officer, active police officer at the time of that sermon. I prearranged for him to come while I was kneeling and take that backpack off of my back and put it over his shoulder and walk away. And it was just a visual, like Jesus is much stronger than Rob Schweitzer. And cast all your anxieties on him, for he cares for you. And so just a breath prayer. God, I give that to you. I give everything and everyone to you. It's the number one thing for situational anxiety. Number two is just quoting scripture to yourself. Preach to your own soul. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And other scriptures that God would have you memorize. That's situational anxiety. Chronic mental illness anxiety, I still recommend all those things, but I just want to do a little expectation management on that, because with chronic mental illness anxiety, there's a lot going on there, including brain chemistry stuff. And so I'm just a big believer that God led scientists to discover penicillin so that we could have antibiotics. And I think antibiotics is one of the ways that God answers prayers for us to get better when we've got an infection. In the same way, I think God led scientists to discover brain chemistry, and that sometimes, either because of genetics or because of a series of traumas, our brain chemistry can get off. And yes, we do all the things I just said with situational anxiety, but I think we also seek professional help of a good doctor who can study our brain chemistry and help address the serotonin levels, all the different brain chemistry things that are going on out there. I believe in that. I don't think it's contrary to scripture at all.
Yeah.
So.
I would love to, in a future episode, sit down with you and unravel your nerddom, and love talking about kind of the intersection between faith and science and all of that, because I feel like your engineering brain would be just really interesting to pick through.
Well, I don't know. We'd gladly do that. I'd also challenge you, as you write your will, as you bring the teddy bear, do a podcast on mental illness.
All right.
Do a podcast on mental illness. Maybe David or whoever God would lead you to bring on here. We need to talk about mental illness more and more and more.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. I had a thought while you were speaking about, right. Yeah, I have a handful of friends who are doctors, and I remember seeing how totally stressed out they were through like med school and everything, and then like my own understanding of the American health system and kind of my somewhat, not super positive feelings on it sometimes.
Right.
And I had a friend who sat me down and said, like, Ben, this is, I love, this EpiPen that I'm holding right here because this is God's creation. And that was the first time when like it clicked. I'm like, oh, like it's not us trying to put Band-Aids on everything. This is an answer to prayer. And so since that experience, that was 2008, it's really opened me up to thinking all of these man-made inventions and creations are truly God-made. Right. And that shift in perspective, I don't know, it's really cool. You also mentioned the phrase a breath prayer.
Right.
So, I mean, me, when I found out I was doing Giving Back to God last week, like I was like, what? I was terrified, right? Because I love praying and I love praying in public, but definitely get really nervous when doing it. But I think it's because perhaps my expectation of what prayer is just something I still have to figure out,
Right.
And I just love that, like, what? Prayer can just be a sentence.
Right.
And it can happen 11 times a day. It's not something where you have to sit down and be in a certain, well, I can be, but it's not something that has to be that way.
Right.
And I love that. I love the freedom in being able to communicate with God in that way. It's really cool hearing that coming from a senior pastor, because I think that's something that a lot of people just, I don't know, feel like it's too informal, or it's not the way to do it. I'm just saying stuff now, but yeah, it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's real prayer. It's just practicing the presence all day long, as if God's right there with you. And so, you said a breath prayer right before we started here. Inviting God into our podcast conversation, and just 30, 40, 50 conversations like that with God throughout the day. Now I'm also a believer in early morning prayer and praying over prayer list. I am. But I think breath prayers is where it's at. It's so relational. It's so real. It's so, God, I give this to you.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Jim, this has been an honor. This has been an amazing episode. And I think a lot of people are going to love listening to this one. So thanks for coming to my cave. And
Benjamin, thank you for keeping things fresh at Grace Fellowship.
Oh,
you think up
sure.
ideas that I never would have thought of. And I love that about you.
Awesome.
And happy birthday to you.
Thank you. All right. We'll see you at the next one.
God bless.
It's good. Cool.